Imagine a world where you're stripped of your identity and locked away, not knowing when or if you'll ever be free again. Now imagine that this world isn't real, but a role-playing game. You're told it's just an experiment, but what happens when the roles become too real? Welcome to the Stanford Prison Experiment, one of the most infamous psychological studies ever conducted. It reveals a chilling truth about how power can corrupt, how authority can twist human nature, and how easily the line between right and wrong can blur. Today we'll dive deep into the Stanford Prison Experiment, exploring how it unfolded, what it revealed about human behavior, and why its lessons are still important today. In the summer of 1971, psychologist Philip Zimbardo wanted to investigate the psychological effects of perceived power, focusing on the struggle between prisoners and prison guards. His plan? To simulate a prison environment and observe what would happen when ordinary people were given power over others. It seemed like a simple setup, but what unfolded was far more disturbing than anyone anticipated. The experiment took place in the basement of Stanford University's psychology building, which was converted into a mock prison. 24 male college students were selected to participate, each randomly assigned to either the role of guard or prisoner. The guards were given uniforms, sunglasses to prevent eye contact, and wooden batons. The prisoners, on the other hand, wore plain smocks and were referred to only by assigned numbers, no names allowed. Everything was meant to mimic a real prison environment, but what no one predicted was how quickly the experiment would spiral out of control. The transformation began almost immediately. Within just a day, the guards started abusing their power. They imposed strict rules, humiliating the prisoners, forcing them to do degrading tasks like cleaning toilets with their bare hands or performing push-ups as punishment. The prisoners, stripped of their identity and dignity, began to break down emotionally, with some experiencing extreme stress and even mental breakdowns. But here's the thing. The guards weren't acting this way because they were inherently cruel people. They were acting this way because of the role they were playing. Given power, they transformed. The prisoners, meanwhile, became passive and submissive, losing sight of the fact that they could leave the experiment at any time. The line between role-playing and reality became blurred, and what was supposed to be a 2-week study had to be shut down after just 6 days due to the extreme emotional distress it caused. What had started as a simulation quickly morphed into something all too real. So, what caused these ordinary college students to change so dramatically in such a short amount of time? The answer lies in a few key psychological concepts. One of the most powerful forces at play in the experiment was de-individuation. This occurs when people lose their sense of self, often as a result of being part of a group or playing a role. The guards, wearing uniforms and sunglasses, were stripped of their individual identity and became part of the collective identity of guards. This made it easier for them to commit acts they might not normally consider, because they no longer felt like themselves. The prisoners, meanwhile, experienced de-individuation in the opposite way. By being referred to as numbers instead of names, they lost their individuality and began to see themselves as powerless objects in the system. The Stanford Prison Experiment is a prime example of how power can corrupt. The guards were given total control over the prisoners, and that power quickly went to their heads. Absolute power, as they say, corrupts absolutely. The guards began to enjoy their authority, pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable and testing how far they could go. With no checks on their behavior, their actions became more extreme as the days went on. The prisoners, on the other hand, exhibited signs of learned helplessness. This is a psychological condition that occurs when people believe they have no control over their situation, even when they do. Despite being able to leave the experiment, many prisoners began to accept their fate, feeling as though escape was impossible. This mental shift made them more submissive and less likely to resist the guards' abuse. Perhaps the most important takeaway from the Stanford Prison Experiment is the power of the situation. Zimbardo's experiment showed that it's not just the personality of the individual that dictates behavior, but also the situation they're placed in. The guards weren't bad people before the experiment, but the situation, being given authority, control, and anonymity, brought out the worst in them. Likewise, the prisoners weren't naturally submissive, but the oppressive environment made them feel powerless and hopeless. The Stanford Prison Experiment provided some shocking insights into human behavior. Good people can do bad things when placed in situations of power. The guards in the experiment weren't sadistic or cruel by nature, but the environment of power and control allowed their worst instincts to emerge. Situations can dictate behavior more than we realize. The participants weren't inherently different from any of us, but the artificial environment they were placed in had a profound effect on their actions and attitudes. Power corrupts quickly, especially when there are no checks or balances in place. Without oversight, the guards became more abusive, and the prisoners became more passive. The Stanford Prison Experiment is still widely discussed today, not only for its findings but also for the ethical controversies surrounding it. Many critics argue that the experiment went too far, exposing participants to severe emotional trauma. Several prisoners experienced breakdowns, and the experimenters, including Zimbardo himself, allowed the abuse to continue for days before finally intervening. In fact, it was only after Zimbardo's fiancée, psychologist Christina Maslach, visited the experiment and expressed horror at what she saw that he decided to shut it down. This raises important ethical questions about the responsibility of researchers to protect their participants, even in the pursuit of scientific knowledge. Today, the ethical guidelines for psychological studies are much stricter, and experiments like the Stanford Prison Experiment would likely never be allowed. Participants must now be fully informed about the risks involved, and researchers must prioritize their mental and emotional well-being. While the Stanford Prison Experiment took place in a highly controlled environment, its findings have important implications for the real world, power and authority in the workplace. The dynamics seen in the experiment can often be found in corporate settings. Supervisors or managers may abuse their power, while employees feel powerless to resist or speak up. This can lead to toxic work environments where unethical behavior goes unchecked. The experiment shows how critical it is to have checks and balances in any system where some people hold power over others. The findings are also relevant in military and law enforcement settings, where authority figures wield significant power. In some cases, soldiers or officers may abuse their power, believing that their role justifies extreme actions. The Stanford Prison Experiment highlights the need for strict regulations and accountability in these high-stakes environments. The experiment also sheds light on how social roles and group identity can influence behavior. Whether it's students in school, people in the workplace, or even within families, the roles we play and the groups we belong to can shape our actions in profound ways. Understanding this can help us become more aware of how our behavior might change depending on the situation. The Stanford Prison Experiment serves as a cautionary tale, reminding us how easily power can corrupt. So how can we prevent this from happening in our everyday lives? Accountability and oversight. One of the most important ways to prevent power abuse is by ensuring that there are systems of accountability in place. Whether it's in the workplace, in schools, or in law enforcement, there should always be oversight to ensure that people in positions of power are acting ethically and responsibly. Empowering the powerless. It's equally important to empower those who are in less powerful positions. In the Stanford Prison Experiment, the prisoners felt helpless because they believed they had no control over the situation. Giving people a voice, ensuring they know their rights, and providing avenues for reporting abuse can help prevent the kind of learned helplessness that was seen in the experiment. Self-awareness and ethical leadership. Finally, we can all work to become more self-aware of how power affects our behavior. Understanding the psychological effects of power can help us resist the urge to abuse it when we find ourselves in positions of authority. Likewise, promoting ethical leadership and teaching people about the importance of responsibility can help prevent power from being misused. The Stanford Prison Experiment may have taken place over 50 years ago, but its lessons are still relevant today. It showed us how easily power can corrupt, how authority can warp our sense of right and wrong, and how even the best of us can be led astray by the roles we play. While the experiment has faced significant ethical criticism, it remains a powerful reminder of the importance of accountability, self-awareness, and ethical behavior. So, the next time you find yourself in a position of power, ask yourself, how will I use it? Will I let it corrupt me or will I rise above? The choice is yours.